Hi, folks, with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the view that the Jewish, very organized international Jewish activist class has, that if they can eradicate all homogeneous Christian societies on the planet, that they will, the Jews that is, will then no longer be persecuted or have a severely reduced risk of persecution. And now, well, I guess in terms of sort of propaganda delivery, if you listen to, say, the senior people in the Jewish organizations in the United States, they're certainly well cashed up and influential. They say, well, anti-Semitism is worse than it's ever been. We're seeing that actually in Australia at the moment. There's claims that anti-Semitism is at fever pitch, worse than it's ever been, and you know, any minute another Hitler's going to appear, and so it's quite borders on the hysterical, the propaganda and the rhetoric that's coming out. If there is anti-Semitism, I mean, I'm not noticing it, but then I'm not in that laneway, I guess. But if it is there, then it's not coming from Christian Gentiles, although that's the propaganda that's trying to be concocted in order to be a general sort of blanket umbrella warning and threat to everyone else. Christian Gentiles are coughed up as and very conveniently, people dressed in black uniforms for parade up and down for the cameras, or neo-Nazis, there you go, Hitler, Nazi, swastika, and then the symbolism is sort of pushed in a mad hysterical sort of montage of symbolism. But I just want to sort of go back to say in the 1990s, you know, the Jewish activist and very prominent activist Barbara Specter, and you know, her speech and so on, and there's footage of her talking about dismembering Christian Gentile societies and so on, and how it's to be done. It's to be done by mass migration and racial diversity, and then, you know, if the Christians don't have homogeneity, you know, racial and religious homogeneity, then they in turn can't threaten Jews. So if we undermine Christianity, if we undermine the racial homogeneity of the white countries, then Jews are not threatened, or will not be, and there will be no second coming of Hitler. So that's the overall rationale. Now, this was in the 90s. So now, at the time, Barbara Specter said, well, anti-Semitism is worse than it's ever been, only in the Western world, apparently, but anti-Semitism is worse than it's ever been. And you know, this is terrible. It means that another Holocaust or pogrom, as in the Russian Tsars evicting Jews from Russia in the late 1800s, another pogrom or Holocaust, you know, another Hitler's coming. It's just around the corner, and it's here. I mean, you know, panic, urgent. We have to do something, and the threat will come only from white homogeneous Christian. That will be the source of the threat. That will be the source of the danger, and it has been historically. The Jews were arguing, or the activist Jews, therefore, if we neutralize them, then we prevent the threat to us. So it sort of makes sense in their activist imagination, at least. Now, this was, of course, about 30 years ago. Barbara Specter was making these kinds. She's asserting with great confidence and great self-assurance that this was it. Now, someone that speaks with that much self-assurance, quite apart from being, you know, ideologically sort of in just one single fantasy zone, she always had a lot of support. Now, she's able to go to Sweden and set up like an if you like, a think tank or a group to study anti-Semitism and to promote ideas, views, and attitudes that would counter anti-Semitism. Well, I wouldn't have thought Sweden was a hotbed of anti-Semitism, but there you go. So she's able to go to at the time, very homogenous white Christian country. And so this Jewish, well known at this stage, Jewish activist with Jewish activist, connections, from Israel and so on. And I don't just mean Zionist, but as in international Jewish activism. She goes to Sweden and is able to get the Christian, homogeneous white government to give her money to set up this organization to counter anti-Semitism in a place where I don't think there was any anti-Semitism. And so Christian gentile money is just shelled out to this Jewish activist to counter anti-Semitism. Doesn't exist. Now, just going back though, I suppose perception of anti-Semitism depends how sensitive someone is, I guess. But going back to the 1870s, and certainly into the 1890s, when the Russians were the Russian Tsarist government were, and I think 1880, 1881, there was an assassination of the Tsar, and it was by various Marxist activist groups, the majority of whom were Jewish, and so it was almost synonymous. Marxist activism, communist activism, and Jewish involvement were the two. So the Russian government did the same as the Nazi government later did, same as the FBI later did in the United States. They said, well, all these people that are setting off bombs and doing this and doing that, and fomenting revolution and having revolutionary cells and this sort of thing, they're all, well, not all, but a large proportion of them are Jewish. Many of those are homosexuals and lesbians. So the profile is, if you're a Jewish person with Marxist sympathies, particularly if you're a homosexual or lesbian, then, or if you're a Jewish homosexual lesbian, then you would be drawn to the communism. So there was the expulsion. Something, depending on whose numbers you believe, from say 1880 to the early 1900s, something in the order of 3 million Jews were expelled from Russia and Russian territories. And they went to primarily the United States, some to Britain and France and around Western Europe, but primarily to the United States. Israel as a state didn't exist at the time, so there wasn't an option to go there. So all these Jewish Russians were being expelled from Russia, and going back to the earlier Russian expulsions, where people were, say, moving into Eastern Europe, or where Russians were annexing Eastern European territories, Bessarabia and the partition of Poland, these sorts of things, then a large number of Jews, particularly around Warsaw, were coming under the rule of the greater Russian Empire. So there was cataloguing at the time, which had gone on well before that, but there was cataloguing of every slight and every law or application of the law that was considered to be disadvantageous to Jewish people, whether they were merchants or corner shop owners. The Jews who were involved in agriculture tended not to be pestered and harassed as say others were. Merchants who were successful Jewish merchants who were capable of paying bribes were also somewhat immune. But people falling outside of those two areas, say, relatively poor people involved in, say, textiles, cloth production or something like that, they didn't do so well in the Russian area. And now there were a few million Jews in and around the greater area of Warsaw and in Poland, but again, Poland was partitioned. But the Jews kept pretty copious catalogues. But just cataloguing of incidents that they perceived were anti-Semitic, and it became integrated with Jewish education and the synagogues and that sort of stuff. So very much sort of part of the, if you like, the extracurricular Talmud-based type education. And the education and the position and the view which carried through, into post World War II, was that Jews were permanently threatened. Everyone was out to get them, and Jews had made no contribution to this view. Even in the 1500s, 1600s, the Russian Tsars were referring to Jews as cheats, that they were cheating people on all their commercial transactions. That can hardly be true, but the perception was there, and this was widely held around not only Russia but Europe at the time, and particularly view in the Christian areas, which comes back to this thing: the Gentiles are the bad guys out to get us. Irrespective of the how accurate assessment that may be, and that was the Jewish activist perception. And so they catalogued these things, and I went only as far back as the 1870s. I suspect it was going much further back than that. And the Jewish activists were cataloguing these supposed slights and oppressions and the like. And if you read the description, you can see the very, very narrow view that they're taking. There's no wider sort of consideration of, well, we did this or we did that, and then they did that to us. There was nothing of that. It's just only cataloguing the slides. Now, these things are repeated in classrooms around the Jewish educational system. I've known Jews that from almost kindergarten, they've been constantly taught about the evil oppressions that the Christians have inflicted upon them, whether it's the Russian pogroms or the Holocaust or something else. I mean, but it's very much part of there. So this is an inherent in this is that, well, where are the problems coming from? Why we're being persecuted? Well, it's Christianity. Christianity's the primary thing, particularly the Catholic side, but Christianity is the primary concern here. And it's the white Christians, particularly in societies that have homogeneous structures. If it's societies that are very fractured, and they've got all sorts of different internal issues with dealing with multicultural thing, they tend not to be the threat. And it's only governments that clamp down on homosexuality and clamp down on Marxist teaching, as it's those societies, and they're homogeneous and Christian. They're the societies that are the danger to us. So if we can undermine those societies, well, undermine isn't their perception. If we can dilute the homogeneity, dilute the Christianity effect, if we can dilute that sufficiently, then those places can never become threats to us, and they can never engage in, because things will be so diverse all over the place. Why would you have a pogrom to expel one group over another, given there are already so many different groups? But if you've got a homogenous group there, then it's very easy to expel one group. Now, something that the Jews the activist Jews don't cover is they want to live differently and separately with different religions, different customs, habits, and behaviours, and so on. They want to live differently. But say, well, why are you treating us differently? Why are you treating us differently? And the answer is quite obvious. Now, all the Jews that were expelled from Russia, as I understand any, were offered the option of becoming Christians, which has happened elsewhere around Europe, by the way. If you want to become Christian, then fine, But that was the Jews were the Jews that left Russia and around that areas, Eastern Europe and what today is part of Poland, and they went to the United States, and they're like they were very much, no, we want to stay Jewish, be Jewish, we want to live the Jewish lifestyle with the Jewish education and so on. Now, the Jewish education, speaking disparagingly of Christian societies and the like, that's hardly going to endear yourself to any society where, if you want to behave that differently, why are you here? Why are you staying here? Why don't you? And so this is something that is still today being debated and considered as to. And if you look at, say, the Ben Shapiros of the United States and other Jewish activists, maybe they're 2, 3, 4 generations American born. They say, well, no, I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish first, American second. and so that naturally would question loyalties. Now, during days of nationalism where national loyalty was considered to be a fairly important, less so today, it's not seen in that same way today. Unless you're gagging to die for your country, you're not really a patriot. That's changed, for example. But if you're American-born or Australian-born or wherever, then you should consider the place of your birth and where your family is to be the place of your first loyalty. And if you don't consider that, again, that would naturally cause questions and doubts in the minds of many. So if we look at Barbara, back to Barbara Specter, she was quite clear and open about her views. If we can dilute the gentile societies into being, in effect, hodgepodge of racial groups, with Christianity being quite a small part of it, then we can in effect prevent all persecution of Jews, because that's the only place it'll come from. I think this is a terribly misguided view, terribly misguided, and I think it's going to cause more problems than they could possibly imagine. And why do Jews flock to these societies? The Ashkenazi Jews, and why do they flock to these white Christian societies? Because they're better run, better organized, better managed, richer societies, wealthier societies. They have protections of contract law, rule of law, due legal process, all these sort of things. But whilst the Jews flock to those sort of societies, because that's where you've got a stable situation to make money and get an education and all that sort of thing, they flock to those societies. At the same time, they want to dismember them in order to protect the Jewish diaspora from another Hitler appearing. So the very societies they flock, and I do mean flock to, they're going to, in the end, dismember the very societies that give them their wealth, give them their certainty. Why would you want to go to a society where the rule of law and due legal process and contract law is just some rando arbitrary sort of factor? That's not going to work in your favor. There's only so many people you can bribe for a certain amount of time. So, I just wanted to talk about this, that every year since the 1870s, and I could go back further, but I didn't, the Jewish activist diaspora said anti-Semitism is worse than it's ever been. It's terrible. It's worse than it's ever been. And when they had the Russian Tsars to blame for, the pogrom, and again, somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million Russian Jews. When I say Russia, the greater Russian Empire, that includes like Ukraine and the Baltic states and what today I think parts of Romania and so on. They were expelled. The Russian Tsar was the bogeyman there, but when the Tsars got blown away, and it was the Soviet communist socialist government there, then they always needed another one, just the one-off affairs like the Dreyfus affair in France. That's not enough to capture international imagination and to be used as a cudgel, whereas the Holocaust was. But these are things. This is a dangerous path to go down. This is throwing out the baby with the bathwater, in my view, and I think we'll come back to bite terribly those who are pushing these views. But again, look at that footage. It's on YouTube, of Barbara Specter, and the confidence, and self-assurance, and the view that it just has to happen. It must happen. It can't not happen. That we have to rid ourselves of these homogeneous gentile Christian societies, and that somehow will be a good thing for everybody. It will. How will it be a good thing for everybody? It's certainly not playing out that way so far. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback Channel, and thank you for listening.